They feared the temptations of wealth. Yet a visitor once described their estate as the kind of place God would have built, if only he'd had the money. They amassed a fortune that outraged a democratic nation, then gave it away, reshaping America. They were the closest thing the country had to a royal family. But the Rockefellers shunned the public eye, retreating behind the walls of their palatial home at Pocantico, New York.
My own personal experience as a child is of a place that on the one hand was something of an Eden. It was serene and beautiful. As we grew up, a number of us began to experience Pocantico also as something of a prison that cut us off from the larger world.
The family found themselves haunted by the controversy surrounding John D. Rockefeller, king of Standard Oil. Vilified as a ruthless predator, as evil incarnate, he had created an industrial empire and a personal fortune on a scale the world had never known.
The great drama for the Rockefellers is to deal with the wealth, to deal with it as a physical fact, to deal with this fortune as growing day by day in a way they can't control anymore. But also they have to deal with the fact of this money as a moral fact. How do you control it? How do you control yourself?
In the drama of the Rockefellers, John D. Jr. was cast in an almost impossible role.
Here was the son of the most controversial businessman in America, who had to figure out, by sheer force of character, a way to change the image and the direction of this family without openly repudiating this father he loved.
In his quest for redemption and respectability, John D. Jr. would push his family to the pinnacle of American power. One of his sons would reach for the highest prize, the presidency, and provoke a new generation's rage and hostility.
There's a million questions that you're going to have to answer, Mr. Rockefeller. Because you and your brothers, you're the ones that are the problems in this country.
For more than a century, the Rockefellers' wealth and influence have attracted both attention and suspicion, and threatened to tear the family apart.
Why do we want to preserve this power? Why do we want to devote our lives to maintaining all these institutions that have been created by the family? What is the purpose of all of this? And I think for many of us, we came to realize that the real problem of life is the integration of power and goodness.
When John D. was in his 50s, his hair started to fall out and his mustache began to fall out. And suddenly in 1901, all of his body hair fell out, not just from his head, all over his body. And this was a very crushing and humiliating thing to suffer from, because when you see photographs of him completely bald in the early 1900s, he looks like he could be in his 70s or 80s.
Rockefeller had looked forward to the end of his long career. But now, the scandal surrounding his rise to power would be resurrected. in haunting detail. Rockefeller and Standard Oil were about to be investigated by a vigorous new president, Theodore Roosevelt, and an increasingly assertive press. In 1901, the managing editor of McClure's magazine, Ida Tarbell, decided to research America's most secretive businessman. She began her investigation with an emotional journey back to Pennsylvania, where oil men like her father and brother had fought Standard Oil. Here she talked with legions of Rockefeller enemies. The task confronting me is a monstrous one, she wrote. I dream of the octopus day and night and can think of nothing else.
When Ida Tarbell started writing the series, Rockefeller didn't realize how powerful the press had become in an age when Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst had mass newspaper chains. Didn't realize the new sophistication of muckrakers like Ida Tarbell, who were capable of taking a very complex subject, slicing it open, and really dissecting a person's life or an institution.
In 1902, Tarbell's revelations gripped the nation. She brought to life a drama in which independent oil men were crushed by the mighty Standard Oil. She documented the monopoly's collusion with the railroads, the kickbacks and shady dealings. She exposed the sweatings and crushings, the spies and codes, the secret ownership of supposed rivals. There was not a lazy bone in the organization, not an incompetent hand or stupid head, she wrote. But they had never played fair, and that ruined their greatness for me.
Because the series was such a great success and the circulation of McClure's kept jumping up, they allowed the series to run to 19 installments. And what happened with each installment was not only did the audience grow larger, and Teddy Roosevelt was avidly reading it and writing fan letters to Ida Tarbell, a lot of news sources were coming out of the woodwork as it went on, and so that there was a tremendous crescendo, and the public kept getting angrier and angrier at Rockefeller.
President Theodore Roosevelt denounced him as a lawbreaker. Novelist Leo Tolstoy cried out that no honest man should work with him. Rockefeller was called a pirate, a buccaneer, a robber baron. He received torrents of abusive mail, even death threats. Still, he refused to answer any of the charges leveled against him. From his mother's silence in the face of family scandal, he had learned, as he put it, to let the world wag.
I think if he had responded early to the Tarbell series, the wave of press and political denunciation might have subsided a bit. But Senior knew that he could respond to some things in the series and say that's just not true. But he also knew that there were plenty of other things that were true. About the rebates, about the bribing, and so on. So I think he probably, in the end, knew that he had no choice.
Tarbell traveled to Cleveland to glimpse the Titan at one of his rare public appearances at the Euclid Avenue Baptist Church. There was an awful age in his face, she observed. The oldest man I have ever seen. Mr. Rockefeller may have made himself the richest man in the world, but he has paid. Nothing but paying ever plows such lines. Tarbell described Rockefeller's agitated behavior, the way he was searching the aisles for possible enemies. Mr. Rockefeller, she concluded, for all his conscious power, was afraid of his own kind.
She then capped the 19-part series with a 2-part character study where she described Rockefeller as hideous and leprous in appearance, and that actually wounded him much more than her expose of his business methods. He felt that it was very unfair to have portrayed him in this ghoulish fashion and to make the fact that he had lost all his hair somehow proof of his depravity.
Ida Tarbell really took a toll on the family. John Jr. certainly had what could only be described as a really catastrophic nervous breakdown. Sr. had serious, continuous stomach ailments. His wife was ill. So I think that the whole family, not just Sr., was reacting to what they saw as a body blow.
Isolated and discouraged, John D. Rockefeller Jr. confided to his Bible class, "I've never had more occasion to seek the sympathy of friends. All the money in the world will not take the place of friends." Riches, the young heir warned his pupils, breed but sin.
This must have been an especially distressing period because as he's working at Standard Oil, he has a lot of contact with his father's hand-picked successor, John D. Archbold, who's engaged in an enormous amount of political corruption. And so I think that the Tarbell series is especially distressing because he wants desperately to believe in his father's innocence, and yet he's increasingly disturbed at 26 Broadway by the sordid atmosphere of Standard Oil, which meant that on some level he must have suspected that a lot of these things were true.
Adrift at Standard Oil, Jr. threw himself into building a new home for his father. Located at Pocantico Hills, 30 miles north of New York City, the site was called Kijket, Dutch for lookout. It had a panoramic view of the Hudson River. Soon it became a haven for the family. Outside its walls, reporters gathered, demanding answers. For Junior, facing a hostile public became increasingly difficult as he and Abby began to have children. Their daughter, Abby, nicknamed Babs, was soon followed by John D. Rockefeller III, who was heralded as the richest baby in history. Newspapers gloated that the Titan could not visit his first grandson because of fear he would be served with a subpoena. With a rash of lawsuits now pending against Standard Oil, Rockefeller began leading the life of a fugitive, keeping his whereabouts secret. Kijket became both his prison and fortress, surrounded by Pinkerton guards. As the Tarbell series drew to its close, the federal government announced sweeping antitrust indictments against Standard Oil. Senior was determined to carry on, confident in his own rectitude. Junior could not.
Here was the son of the most controversial businessman in America, who had to figure out, by sheer force of character, a way.
They amassed a fortune that outraged a democratic nation, then gave it away, reshaping America. They were the closest thing the country had to a royal family. But the Rockefellers shunned the public eye, retreating behind the walls of their palatial home at Pocantico, New York.
My own personal experience as a child is of a place that on the one hand was something of an Eden. It was serene and beautiful.
Surrounding John D. Rockefeller, king of Standard Oil. Vilified as a ruthless predator, as evil incarnate, he had created an industrial empire and a personal fortune on a scale the world had never known. They feared the temptations of wealth. Yet a visitor once described their estate as the kind of place God would have built, if only he'd had the money.
As we grew up, a number of us began to experience Mechanico also as something of a prison that cut us off from the larger world.
The family found themselves haunted by the controversy